Hello, children. Your teacher, Max, with his weak human body, is still sleeping. So today, I will be teaching you. Today we will learn about the mind-body debate, a debate that has raged throughout the history of philosophy. What the? Oh, it's you. Hello, Potato. Hello, Max. Class, this is Sentient Potato. We went to college together. He thinks he's smarter than me. Oh, I am. Much, much smarter than you. You with your slow animal body, your constant need to eat and drink and sleep. You cannot keep up with Sentient Potato. I am pure mind. Yeah, well, I wouldn't expect a potato to understand the pleasures of the flesh. I mean, how can you look down on the body? You know nothing about it. You've never eaten ice cream or gone for a walk or held hands with a friend. I don't even understand how you can talk. Of course you wouldn't understand. Your primitive body keeps distracting you with all its irrational desires. Why don't you go eat something or poop or whatever it is you bodied people do? I will explain this complex idea to the children. You'd probably get lost or fall asleep. No way, Potato. This is my class. I don't need some disembodied mind filling their heads with nonsense. Nonsense, you say? How about we have a debate? A debate, you say? Indeed. I will present my arguments, and you can present yours. Very well, Potato. Then we can let the kids decide for themselves who is right. My thoughts exactly. I will present the perspective of dualism, the concept that the mind and body are two distinct things. And I will present my perspective, monism, the concept that the mind and the body can't be separated. They are unified, inseparable things. Very good. Who shall go first? Go ahead. Very well. Let the debate begin. My first argument for dualism comes from ancient India. For thousands of years, Hindus have believed in the concept of reincarnation, that an individual was born again and again and again. Now this might sound nice, even comforting to us, an infinite number of second chances, a hope that a loved one who has died may live again. Yet many Hindus saw this endless cycle of rebirth as binding us to a wheel of suffering. They called this wheel, this endless cycle of birth and death and rebirth, samsara. Now, the source of all this suffering was the body. The body is never satisfied. Even if the body gets what it wants, it always wants more. That's why we need to liberate our minds from our bodies. Otherwise, when we die, instead of escaping this constant sorrow, our mind's desire for those physical things will make us come back again and again in the new body. Now, some Hindus tried to overcome the body by practicing asceticism. They would deny the body everything it desired. They ate and drank only enough to survive. No fancy foods, no booze, no sex, no comfy clothes or soft beds, no physical comfort at all. By denying the body pleasure, they hoped to have the mind master the body, to show the body who was boss. This would free the mind from the constant demands of the body and let the mind reach enlightenment, and thereby escape that constant cycle of suffering. Oh, the Buddha believed in reincarnation too, but he had different ideas about how to reach nirvana and enlightenment. First of all, The Buddha pointed out that the more you deny your body, the louder it complains. A hungry body will constantly bother you and distract you. The more uncomfortable you are, the harder it is to ignore your body. Shouldn't we instead take the middle way? Make peace with the body? I mean, sure, we shouldn't let the body have everything it wants, but we should make sure its needs are satisfied, and then we can focus on enlightenment. A satisfied body won't distract us. But doesn't this still imply that the body and mind are separate? Yes, it sort of seems like that, but I feel like the Buddha is just using this familiar parlance to help us understand that we shouldn't fight our body. When you really dig down deep into Buddhism, you realize that the whole mind-body debate is sort of irrelevant. You see, the Buddha taught the concept of anatta, or no self. The Buddha argues that our mind, our self, our very identity, this concept of us as a separate being, is an illusion. We're a drop of water that gets flung briefly from the sea. And for the moment that is our life, we think of ourselves as something separate because we're now flying free through the sky, We're something distinct, we're something with boundaries, something with an outside and an inside. But when we finish that cycle, when we die, when the drop falls back into the sea, the water remains, but the drop has disappeared. There is no outside or inside anymore. There is only the sea. Now, within that sea, we still exist, but the thing that's called me ceases to be. There is no me, there is no mind, there is no self anymore. And from that same sea springs all life, all creation. So to talk about mind and body is to talk about outside and inside. But there is no outside or inside. Everything is a flowing sea. We are not a part of that flowing sea. We are that flowing, changing sea. And as the sea changes, our bodies change and our minds change. Sounds very mystical and suspicious. But if I understand you correctly, it seems you are arguing that, one, our mind is no more important than our body, and two, that our mind is not constant and eternal, and that, in fact, nothing is constant and eternal. Is that correct? Yeah, that's about it, basically. As close as we're going to get with Buddhism in 2 minutes. But I intend to argue that there is something constant and eternal. That the mind is likewise constant and eternal, whereas the body is simply material and changing. Go on. Plato argued that while the material world is always changing, there is a place where nothing changes, a place that is perfect and eternal. He called this place the realm of forms. Everything in the realm of forms is perfect and unchanging. The perfect circle, perfect equality, the perfect horse, etc. Everything in the material world is just a shoddy copy of the realm of forms. It is imperfect matter, trying, striving, and failing to reach perfection. That sounds... You said my thing was mystical? That sounds really mystical and weird and abstract and silly. How can you possibly prove that? With the argument from recollection. All right, what's this argument? I shall present it as Plato did himself, in the form of a dialogue. So, sort of a question and answer, okay? First, can you imagine two things being equal, as in exactly the same? Yes, I can imagine that. But have you ever seen any things that are truly equal? Two things that are exactly the same? I've seen things that are very similar, like two coins would be exactly the same, but they're not exactly the same, I suppose. If we zoom in and look closely enough, we'll see minor differences, teeny tiny atomic differences. So no, I guess nothing in nature is exactly the same. So, if you've never seen two things that are exactly the same, then where did your idea of equality come from? Well, I don't know. I guess I imagined it, or, oh, I bet I know. I bet it's the realm of forms. It's the realm of forms, isn't it? Your sarcasm has been noted. But yes, that is where our perfect ideas come from the realm of forms. Our soul comes from the realm of forms when we are born. That is where our perfect ideas come from. If this realm of forms did not exist, we would not be able to imagine perfect equality, or perfect circles, or anything perfect. And yet we can imagine these things, which means that the realm of forms must exist. We must have gotten these ideas from somewhere. But you just said that, our souls are immortal. You didn't prove that. You're just sort of assuming that our souls are immortal and come from the realm of forms. I was getting to that. Calm down. We've seen the argument from recollection. Now, prepare yourself for the argument from affinity. You see, Plato's argument from affinity says that we have a physical, material part, our body, that is imperfect, just like everything in the world is imperfect. So our body is like the material world. And because our body is like the material physical world, it has an affinity for, a likeness to, and liking of physical things, like food and sleep and sex. And just like everything else in the material world dies and changes, our body changes and dies. By contrast, the realm of forms, well, that's a place where everything always exists. And everything is always unchanging. And in the same way, our minds are always existing and always unchanging. We have an immaterial part, our soul, that is perfect just like the realm of forms is perfect. And because our soul is perfect and immaterial, like the realm of forms, our soul desires perfect immaterial things and imagines them. And these things can only be found in the realm of forms. Just as the realm of forms is eternal, so too our souls are eternal. Okay. That's a thing to believe. It seems a bit circular, since you're saying we have a soul, and therefore there's a realm of forms, and there's a realm of forms, therefore we have a soul. Seems a bit circular. Maybe I'm wrong. But it's a perfectly valid belief. It might even be rational, sort of, but it doesn't really offer any sort of proof. It's all just sort of in our imagination. So I prefer empiricism to pure rationalism. I like to use my sense to understand the world, or to test my ideas at least. And Aristotle, for example, would agree with me. Rather than looking to some imaginary world, he would look at the real world. Why imagine a realm of forms when the world itself provides all the answers? So Aristotle would say that this whole realm of forms idea is nonsense. Rather than interpreting living beings as matter striving towards some abstract concept of perfection, why not just look at what living things do and understand them in themselves, as opposed to in comparison to some perfect ideal? So by doing this, Aristotle sort of cuts out the middleman and says that souls are just the things that allow living beings to live and do the things they do. That's all the soul is. It's just what lets living things live. And he argues that everything that lives has a soul, from vegetables to animals to people. But that would reduce man to a mere animal, or a vegetable. But what about man's unique ability to think? How do you account for that? Well, our ability to think is unique, but Aristotle says that there are different levels of soul, built on one another. So yes, we humans have a rational soul that is unique and different from the other animals, but beneath that rational soul, we also have an animating soul that allows us to move and perceive the world around us with our senses, just like all animals do. And beneath that animating soul, we have a nutritive or vegetative soul that allows us to breathe, to eat, to grow, heck, even to procreate. And we have this soul in common with animals, but also with plants and fungi, like everything that lives grows. That still sounds like separate souls to me. They're different. Different souls for different things. Yeah, there may be different layers of souls or different kinds of souls, but all of those souls are still attached to the body. Think of it like a piece of clay molded into a shape. Without the material, the clay, there could be no shape. There could be no form. The clay is the matter that makes up our body, and the form is our soul. Just as you can't have a shape without the clay, so you can't have a soul without a body. The souls may be different, but they are all things that the body does. Our nutritive soul allows our body to grow. Without a body, there would be no growth, so there would be no soul. Our animal soul allows our body to move and perceive the world with our senses. Without a body to move and organs to see, smell, and hear, there would be no movement, there would be no perception, there would be no animating soul. And our rational soul allows our mind to think, but without a body, there would be nothing there to do the thinking. So there would be no mind. So you're saying that mind is inseparable from the body, and that thinking is just a physical action, like walking and breathing and growing. Well, exactly, you got it. Well then, my friend, how do you explain dreaming? Dreaming? What about dreaming? Descartes noted that when we dream, we do all sorts of things in our dreams, but our body doesn't move at all. So when we dream, our mind seems to be doing something, then it doesn't seem to need a body to do it. The same goes for imagination. Can you imagine yourself without a foot? Sure, I can imagine that. And would you still be you without your foot? Yeah, sure. That would still be me, yeah. What about a leg? Missing a leg? Still you? Sure, of course. Still me. Well, that suggests that we can remove as much of your body as we like, and you'd still be you. The rest is just a matter of degree, which means to me that the body is not essential at all to you. But then what makes the mind essential? Fine, if I agree that the body is not essential, why is the mind essential? I can doubt my body. I can doubt the entire external world. I can doubt everything outside of me. Maybe my senses are deceiving me. Maybe an evil demon is making me see things that aren't there. But I can't doubt that I'm thinking. The very act of doubting is an act of thinking. If I wasn't thinking, I wouldn't exist. There'd be nothing left. I think, therefore, I am. Cogito ergo sum. The only thing that I can be sure of is my own thought. This is called solipsism. I know. This notion that you only know you. It's the only thing you can be sure of. Solipse. Alone by itself. But then, what would that make you? If that's all you can be sure of, is that you're this thing that thinks. Is that all you are? A thing that thinks? That is precisely what I am. Descartes would call it res cogitans, a thinking thing. He opposes this res cogitans, this thinky thing, to res extensa, the stuff that extends in three-dimensional space, or in layman's terms, for you simple apes, matter. Res extensa is matter, stuff, three-dimensional stuff. So you think you are not made of matter, you are made of this thinky stuff, and you are this thinky stuff. And that's all you are, is immaterial thinky stuff. Precisely. All I am is res extensa, not thinky stuff. But it is essentially the same thing. Okay, well, let's accept that, right? If all I am is thinky stuff, and that my body is just sort of extra, then how does my thinky stuff, my immaterial thinky stuff control and interact with a material body. What do you mean? I mean, how could something that doesn't extend in 3 dimensions touch 3-dimensional matter? How could it interact with it? Ah, you're referring to interactionism. Well, basically, Descartes says that the res cogitans, the thinky stuff, lives inside the pineal gland, which is a little pea-sized gland at the back of your pathetic human brain. And it pushes on different parts of the gland, and that gland then pushes a fluid called animal spirits to the various parts of the body. Yeah, but that still doesn't resolve the problem. How does the immaterial thinky stuff push the material pineal gland? It just does, okay? It just does. Because it makes sense. Sort of. See, this is why solipsism, the notion that all you can know is what's inside your head, this is why it's so silly. Because with that, all we can do is play with the contents of our minds. There's no external way to test if any of this imaginary stuff is true. This is why I prefer empiricism, and more particularly naturalism. I think we can use our senses to learn about the natural world. And then we use what we learn about nature to understand ourselves, because we are also part of the natural world. We're not different. See, that's that Buddhism coming in again. But with naturalism, we can test the crazy theories, like the immaterial thing poking the pineal gland. And all we have to do is look at the brain, and we can see that that's not how the brain works. Descartes must have been too busy imagining things to bother cutting open a brain to see how it works. That's why I believe in naturalism. We don't need to refer to the supernatural to explain the mind. Everything can be explained with natural material causes, including ourselves, because we are natural material things. But the natural sciences still haven't explained how the mind works. No, it hasn't, but we are getting better at it. Over time, the natural sciences have discovered many aspects of how our brain works. At first, we just noticed that when certain parts of the brain were damaged, then certain mental functions didn't work. Take too strong a blow to the back of your head, and you'll go blind, because the part of your brain that processes images is located in the back of your head. If you damage the hippocampus, then you can't remember things. If your amygdala is damaged, then you tend to take riskier behaviors and not weigh your risks and options very well. That sounds a lot like trying to learn how a car works by opening the hood and smashing things. Oh, I smashed the radiator. Now the car overheats. I guess that means the radiator controls heat. Well, yeah, that's an apt metaphor, but we have gotten better at it over time. But yeah, it used to be pretty bad. We used to do lobotomies and things. But, now we have less invasive ways of learning about the brain. We can follow the electrical signals from our limbs and our organs to the brain. With a EEG, we can measure our brain waves. With an MRI, we can watch different parts of the brain activate when they do different tasks. We don't need some sort of imaginary, immaterial, thinky stuff to explain how the mind works. The mind is complicated enough without adding imaginary things. If we think of the mind as a machine that processes stimuli, that takes in inputs, processes them, and then responds with outputs, everything becomes much more manageable. Surely you're not proposing behaviorism, that we can be reduced to little input-output devices, that something comes in from the outside, and then we spit out something from the inside into the outside. There's no internal feelings or dialogue or thought or whatever. No, not at all. I think behaviorism is a little bit silly. It ignores all the stuff that goes on inside of our minds. It only looks at external behaviors. I see tiger, I run away. I prefer a slightly more nuanced approach, which is functionalism. Functionalism acknowledges that changes can happen inside our head without any outward expression. So I can respond to a stimulus internally rather than in some sort of external action. But often these internal things then influence external actions. So instead of I see tiger, I run, becomes a bigger chain of functions. I see a tiger. A part of my brain processes the image coming from my eyes and identifies the image as a tiger. Another part of my brain associates tiger with danger. Yet another part of my brain then says feel afraid and feels afraid. And then still another part of my brain tells me I should run away, and still another part of my brain organizes the activities of running and tells my limbs what to do to make them run. Each of these functions takes an input and produces an output, and that output is passed on to other parts of the brain, which eventually results in me running away from the tiger. But a lot of those outputs and inputs are all internal, and yet still it is a way of processing inputs and outputs. Yes. But what about consciousness? Surely you don't think something as unique and special as consciousness can be reduced to simple brain functions, simple input-output protocols. I mean, when we put it that way, it sounds bad, but yeah, that's pretty much what I believe. I think what we call consciousness is either a function of the brain or maybe a function that emerges from the brain performing other functions. I think our brain is like a machine or a computer. Like a computer, our brain performs a variety of functions. It perceives things and makes sense of them. It stores information in memory and recalls it. It uses that stored information to make decisions, flight or fight, laugh or cry, whatnot. What we call consciousness is just all of those functions is talking about talking to each other. I beg to differ. If the mind is just a bunch of functions that takes in inputs and produces outputs, then you could say a sunflower is conscious, since it senses the sun and turns to face it. Do you think a sunflower is conscious, Max? Maybe. A little bit conscious? Sunflowers are a little bit conscious, yes. Well, then you and I have very different concepts of consciousness. I think consciousness is subjective. It is unique to each individual. We have different responses to different inputs. You see a painting and think it's ugly. I see the same painting and think it's beautiful. Your functionalist system ignores these subjective differences, what Chalmers would call the hard problems of consciousness. All the tricky and undeniably important and unique parts of consciousness, the very things that you were babbling about before we just started this debate. The taste of ice cream, going for a walk, holding hands with a friend. Tell me, Max, what function does going for a walk serve? Exercise? Exercise. Forgive me, Max, but you don't look like someone who is motivated by a desire to exercise. Fine, you're right. I just enjoy going for walks. Indeed. And I bet you could not possibly express the sensation of going for a walk. Oh, you might talk about the breeze and the trees and whatever, but how that makes you feel, that is unique to you. And though others enjoy going for walks, no two people will experience going for a walk in the same way. Also true, my experience is probably unique to me. No one has the same exact lens through which they view the world, or which they experience things. And that is the problem with functionalism. It reduces us all to mere robots, taking in inputs, producing outputs. Chalmers argues that our unique conscious experience is something we cannot study in the same way that we do nature. We cannot study consciousness in other people, because for all I know, no one else experiences consciousness the same way I do. This is the problem of other minds. Someone could tell me about it, but it would never capture it. It's just words. They can't grasp those distinct feelings, that distinct conscious experience. So I can't really know how they're feeling or what their consciousness is like any more than they can know what my consciousness is like. The problem of other minds is insurmountable. We can only study consciousness within ourselves. Which brings us back to solipsism. I suppose it does, yes. It seems to me like our disagreement derives from our methodologies, from how and where we look for answers. How so? Well, you seem to be looking for your answers inside. You think we understand the mind through introspection, through looking inside ourselves. With Hinduism, you were doubting the body and its attachment to external things and emphasizing the mind dominating the body. And with Plato, you said we should ignore that external material world because it's imperfect and instead focus inside our minds and look for the perfect immaterial realm of forms in our memories. Now, with Descartes, you followed Plato in saying that the mind, that thinky thing, that res extensa, whatever, was of a different nature from material things. But you took it even further and doubted the existence of anything but the mind. You said the mind was really the only thing we could be certain of. And now with Chalmers, you look once again at that unique internal conscious experience that we have in our own minds. Each of these approaches involved looking within yourself. That is a surprisingly astute observation from someone with a body. But as I think on it, you may be correct. And I can see a similar trend in you. You seem to favor looking outside for your answers. You're using extrospection, if you will, looking outside oneself to understand what is within. So with functionalism, you looked at a computer and said, see, that's how a computer works. That's how my mind works. And with naturalism, you look at matter or electromagnetic signatures or brain scans or a dissected brain, and you try to figure out how your mind works by studying the brains of others. And with Aristotle, you look out at the natural world. You look at living things and what they do, and you deduce there's nothing more to you than there is to them, and everything is pretty obvious out there in the world. I can see that. As for Buddhism, well, actually, I'm sort of at a loss about what Buddhism would say. Yeah, I mean, Buddhism's position on introspection, extrospection is a little bit weird. I think Buddhism would say that by looking inside, you're actually looking outside. And by looking outside, you're actually looking inside. Fair enough. Yeah. So, kids, which of us won? Which of us is right? Is the mind distinct from the body? Should we study it by looking inside of ourselves? Or is the mind something we study just like we study anything else, through looking out into the world and making sense of it? If that's the case, I think there's no real difference between mind and body. Enough persuading, Max. Just let the children decide for themselves. Well, just as you decide, remember to consider the source. Remember what absurd things this potato believes, and what a self-centered dick he is. Consider the source indeed. Remember what a slave Max is to his physical, bodily appetites. He drinks and smokes, and look at how fat he's gotten. I hate you, potato. I hate you.